The USS Resolute drifted through the blackness of space, its engines quiet as it coasted toward the anomaly. Captain Lara Mason sat in her command chair, eyes fixed on the holographic display hovering above her. The great dark stretched endlessly before them, an uncharted sector on the fringes of human exploration. Few ships ventured this far, and even fewer returned. How far to the signal source? Mason asked, her voice steady despite the tension rippling through the bridge. Lieutenant James Wu, her first officer, glanced at his console. 2 hours at our current speed. The signal's faint, but it's getting stronger. Mason nodded, her mind racing. The signal had appeared out of nowhere 3 days ago, a weak distress call emanating from deep within the nebula. It didn't match any known alien languages or human distress protocols. What troubled her more was the location. No known civilization had ever existed this far from the core worlds. The Great Dark was supposed to be empty, a vast, unexplored void. Dr. Lara Voss, the ship's xenobiologist, stood nearby, her curiosity evident. If the signal is as old as the readings suggest, we could be looking at remnants of an ancient civilization. This could be the discovery of a lifetime. Or it could be a trap, Chief Engineer Marcus O'Connor muttered from his station. I don't like the feel of this place. Mason shared his unease but kept it to herself. Something about the Great Dark made her skin crawl. Even the ship's AI had been experiencing glitches since they'd entered the sector. Malfunctions, strange data spikes, nothing dangerous, but enough to make everyone on board nervous. We've been sent to explore the unknown, not shy away from it, Mason said, more to herself than anyone else. Keep a close eye on those systems, O'Connor. We can't afford a breakdown out here. As the Resolute crept closer to the source of the signal, the sense of dread intensified. The nebula's swirling clouds of gas and dust cast eerie shadows across the hull, blocking out the stars. For the first time in days, the crew could no longer see Earth's faint signal on their long-range scanners. They were well and truly alone. Captain, Wu said, his voice tense. I'm picking up something. A structure, dead ahead. Mason leaned forward, her heart quickening. The holographic display zoomed in, revealing the outline of a massive space station, half buried in the thick nebula. It was old, far older than anything human-built, and its size dwarfed even the largest of Earth's colonies. Prepare an away team, Mason ordered, her voice steady despite the chill running down her spine. We're going in. As the Resolute glided closer to the station, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that they were trespassing somewhere forbidden. The silence of space pressed in, and for the first time in her career, she felt a flicker of fear. Whatever they were about to find, it was ancient, and it wasn't friendly. The away team moved cautiously through the station's dark corridors, their helmet lights cutting through the thick, dust-filled air. Captain Mason led the group, her pulse quickening as the strange structure loomed around them. The station was massive, far larger than anything built by human hands. Its alien architecture was both beautiful and unsettling, sharp, angular lines that seemed to warp and twist the closer you looked. Atmosphere is thin, but breathable, Dr. Voss reported, scanning the air with a handheld device. No signs of life. That's not comforting, Chief Engineer O'Connor muttered as he glanced around. This place feels wrong. Mason couldn't disagree. The silence was oppressive, and the station felt like a tomb. No power hummed through its walls, and yet the distress signal continued to pulse from deep within. It had been transmitting for millennia, long after whatever civilization built this place had vanished. Lieutenant Wu moved ahead, his weapon at the ready. The signal's coming from a control center 2 levels down. We should get moving. The team proceeded deeper into the station, passing through chambers filled with strange machines, some still faintly glowing with ancient power. Symbols and inscriptions covered the walls, their meaning indecipherable. Dr. Voss stopped every few steps to take recordings, her excitement barely contained. These markings, she whispered, her voice awed. They're a mix of languages I've never seen before. This could be a goldmine of alien knowledge. Or a graveyard, Mason said under her breath, her eyes scanning the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the central control room. It was massive, with towering columns of unknown technology reaching from floor to ceiling. In the center of the room was the source of the signal, a pulsating device, encased in an orb of translucent material. The air around it seemed to shimmer, distorting the space like a heat mirage. This must be the distress beacon, Wu said, approaching cautiously. Dr. Voss knelt beside the orb, her eyes wide. Incredible. This tech is beyond anything we've ever encountered. Suddenly, a low hum filled the room. The orb flickered, and ancient consoles lit up, casting eerie blue light across the walls. Mason tensed, her hand on her weapon. "Captain," Wu said, his voice tight. "We've activated something." A holographic figure materialized in the center of the room. It was alien, tall, with elongated limbs and a face devoid of features. It spoke in a language none of them understood, but its tone was unmistakable, a warning. "It's a message," Voss said, eyes locked on the figure. "They're warning us." The figure gestured toward the orb, then toward the darkness beyond the room. Its form flickered as if struggling to stay intact, and the lights around them dimmed. Mason felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What happened here?" she whispered. The hologram's final words echoed in the chamber, and though they couldn't understand it, the meaning was clear. The station wasn't abandoned. Something was still here, something dangerous. "We need to leave," Mason ordered, her voice hard. "Now." The Resolute shook violently as the massive space station began to break apart. Alarms blared through the ship's corridors, and Captain Mason held onto the edge of her command chair, her knuckles white. "We need to get out of here." O'Connor shouted from the engineering console, frantically working to stabilize the ship's failing systems. "The gravitational field from the station is pulling us in. Engines to full power, now." Mason commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The crew worked quickly, but the ship's systems were unresponsive, glitching as the ancient technology from the station seemed to bleed into the Resolute's controls. On the screen, the alien station collapsed in slow motion, consumed by an enormous, swirling mass of dark energy that had begun to coalesce from the heart of the structure. It was the Devourer, the ancient, malevolent force the alien hologram had warned them about. It was alive, and it was waking up. Lieutenant Wu, standing at the weapons station, stared at the screen in horror. "What is that thing?" Mason didn't know how to answer. The Devourer didn't look like any life form she'd ever encountered. It was vast, made of some unknown, dark matter, its form shifting and expanding, as if it were devouring everything around it. It seemed to warp space itself, bending light and energy toward it, a cosmic void pulling all into its endless maw. "Captain," Dr. Voss said from her station, her voice trembling, "the Devourer isn't just feeding on the station, it's consuming energy, matter, anything it can touch. If it gets free, it will tear through everything in its path." "We can't let that happen," Mason said. "Can we escape?" O'Connor cursed under his breath. "The engines aren't responding. It's like this thing is feeding off our power. Every time we try to boost the engines, the systems short out." Mason's mind raced. There has to be a way. What about the alien tech we found? Can we use it to fight back? Voss hesitated but then nodded slowly. "There's something in the data we recovered from the station. It mentioned a vulnerability, something about neural patterns. The Devourer species never encountered anything like humans. Our minds might be its weakness." Mason stared at her. "You think we can use our neural signals against it?" "It's possible," Voss said, though doubt flickered in her eyes. "If we can amplify our neural patterns, we might disrupt the Devourer's energy field long enough to break free. We don't have another choice, Mason decided. Get the prototype neural amplifier online. We'll link it to the ship's systems and use it to project our thoughts, our will to survive, into that thing. The crew moved swiftly, connecting the neural amplifier to the ship's core. As they did, the Devourer drew closer, its form twisting as it fed off the debris of the station, growing larger with each passing moment. "Ready, Captain," Wu said, his face grim. Mason closed her eyes, focusing her thoughts on one thing: survival. "Activate the amplifier." The ship hummed as the neural amplifier powered up, and the crew's thoughts surged into the void. The Devourer roared, a soundless, terrifying cry, as the human mind lashed against it. It faltered, its form flickering and writhing. "Now!" Mason shouted. "Full power to the engines." The Resolute surged forward, breaking free from the Devourer's pull as it shrieked behind them, wounded but far from defeated. They had escaped for now, but Mason knew the battle was far from over. The Resolute limped through the cold vacuum of space, sparks flickering from damaged systems. Captain Mason gripped the armrests of her chair, watching the swirling darkness behind them. The Devourer, now partially weakened by their neural attack, was still in pursuit. It hadn't slowed, relentless in its hunger. "How much longer until we reach the colony?" Mason asked, her voice tight. 20 minutes at current speed, Lieutenant Wu replied. "But, Captain, it's closing in fast. We won't make it in time." Mason turned to Dr. Voss, who stood by the neural amplifier, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Do we have any more tricks up our sleeve?" The amplifier slowed it down before, but not enough. Voss shook her head. "We can try amplifying again, but it's risky. The first blast strained our neural systems, doing it again could kill us." Mason stared at the swirling mass of darkness growing larger on the view screen. The Devourer was a cosmic force beyond anything they had ever encountered, and if it reached the colony, millions of lives would be at risk. The only thing standing between the creature and humanity was the Resolute, and a rapidly depleting plan. "There's no choice," Mason said quietly. "If we don't stop it here, it will keep devouring everything in its path. We need to make a final stand." O'Connor, his face pale and drenched in sweat, turned from the engineering console. "If we're really going through with this, Captain, we need to pour everything we have into that amplifier. We'll divert all remaining power to the neural array, but there won't be anything left for the engines or shields. It's a one-way trip." Mason met his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. "Do it." O'Connor nodded grimly and began working on the controls. The lights dimmed as every last bit of power was redirected to the amplifier. The crew braced themselves, knowing the gravity of what was coming. "Dr. Voss," Mason said, standing and moving toward the amplifier. "If we're going to stop this thing, we need to focus on what makes us human, our will to survive. This thing feeds on fear, on destruction. We need to project the opposite." Voss nodded, her hands trembling as she adjusted the neural links. "We'll focus on our resilience, our defiance. That's all we've got." Mason turned to her crew, all of them exhausted, wounded, but alive. "I know we're all scared, but we've been through worse. We're still here because humanity doesn't give up. Let's show this thing what that means." The amplifier hummed to life, and the crew closed their eyes, their thoughts and emotions feeding into the machine. Mason concentrated on her memories of Earth, of the people she loved, of every battle humanity had fought and won. A wave of unity surged through the neural network, linking the minds of the crew into one unstoppable force. The Devourer approached, its dark tendrils reaching toward the Resolute. The amplifier pulsed, sending a torrent of human will directly into the entity's core. The Devourer shrieked, its form distorting and writhing under the pressure. Space itself seemed to warp, the darkness retreating as the crew's collective defiance lashed out at the monster. The ship shook violently, systems failing one by one as the amplifier overloaded. Mason's vision blurred, her body shaking under the strain, but she refused to give in. With one final pulse, the devourer screamed, imploding in on itself, its dark energy collapsing into nothingness. Silence fell. The Resolute floated in the aftermath, battered but victorious. Mason opened her eyes, gasping for breath. "Status?" she asked, her voice weak. We did it," Wu said, disbelief in his voice. "It's gone." Mason leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. They had won, against all odds, they had survived.